So here we have the HydraFacial machine. Most of the machines are exactly the same. So how we get started is it's plugged in. Now the on switch is around here. Switch it on. Wait for the screen to wake up. Okay, so this is when we know that it's on. We do need to press it to wake it up. So just give it a press. So here we have the control to all of the different parts of the machine. So if we look at the scrubber, the ultrasound and the radio frequency, they all have settings. So in no particular order, let's say we want to use the ultrasound, we would switch it on there and we would take it up to the setting. And as you can see, once we've pressed it on there, the light comes on there, so that's ready to use. I was just showing that one as an example, but that's not the first one that we use. But if we look at the abrasion, the cold and the spray, they only have on-off options. They don't have particular settings. So the first part of the treatment is the abrasion. So once we're ready to go ahead, what we would do is we would turn the abrasion on. Now it is quite noisy. It's quite a noisy part to it. Now, before we begin with the abrasion, what we would need is we would need to put water in here. Now, don't get too hung up on A, B and C. So water will go through the machine on A, B or C, depending on where this dial is pointing to. Zoom in a little bit. So at the moment, as you can see, the dial is pointing towards A, the select area. A happens to be linked to the dermabrasion. So when this dermabrasion is switched on and it's used, the water will be taken from A through the machine and will be emitted, excreted through the A. The next place that I want to draw your attention towards is the water and the air. So although these three don't have settings of 1 to 10, we can set the air and the water here. So I always start off with any client with the air in the middle and the water in the middle. So we can always turn it up or we can turn it down. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we've got water in here so that water will be emitted from the dermabrasion. Now B is for a different section which I'm going to talk to you about in a bit, and C is actually for cleaning. So it may be that you'll have noticed that you can buy products called A, B and C when you buy the machine. I personally wouldn't waste your money on them because they don't actually tell you what it is in the bottle. So in A, if you want to, you can add a cleansing product. So when the dermabrasion or the abrasion is taking part, as well as the water being emitted through here, the cleansing foam or the cleansing lotion. I personally don't like to use a cleanser that foams or lathers. If it foams or lathers, what it means is that it contains sulfates or parabens, which means it's not very good for your skin. So all I do is put in there pure bottled water. I'm going to do that now. B is emitted with the air, and C is what the machine recommends that you use to cleanse the dermabrasion or the abrasion. I personally don't cleanse it through here. I personally take it off and cleanse it. So the only bottle that I put anything in is A. I don't put anything in B and I don't put anything in C. I'm going to reiterate that in a little while. Now, when you purchase the machine, you will receive a number of nibs. If you look at them, they do all have slightly different shapes. They're all slightly different. And how the machine recommends that this works is that you would place that on there, and that would act as your part of the tool for the abrasion. Now, personally, I don't use these anymore. The first reason I don't use them is because these are very difficult to clean. And what happens is dead skin cells get caught up in there, and that makes it not hygienic to use from one client to the other, because there's too much of a risk of cross-contamination. Who wants to have a facial done when other people's dead skin cells are caught up in there? However, it is worth saving them. What I've done is I've purchased these from Amazon. You can buy a pack of 4 for around £10. Now, these can be sterilised very easily. You can turn them inside out. They can go under boiling water. They can be sterilised. And they're actually a lot softer on the skin. However, if you have a client that has an allergy to latex, those of these after each use. So, I always use bottled water. You could use ionised water if you chose to as well in A. And it's really important to keep this clean, because the water that comes through there goes directly onto the client's face. So here we go. Push that in. Out it comes. And it's worth having bottle brushes in stock, in-house, so that you can keep these nice and clean. So you'd probably go through about that much water for the average facial. And I would opt to empty the water and clean in between each client, just to maintain that hygiene. So what we do is, I'm going to get the machine working just so that you can see it. Again, it is very, very loud. So we're going to switch it on there, which means that it's automatically switched on there. If I was to turn that off and I was to press that, what you can see is by pressing that button there, it automatically turned it on onto the machine. So I'm going to remind you that we've got the water and the air at 50%. We know that the select button is pointing towards A, so we know that water is going to derive from A. Flaws of the machine. So I'm holding on to, see there, I just did it then. So this would suggest that there's not enough, the water needs to go on higher, because you can't actually see any water coming out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the water up. There we go. Can you see the water? The water's coming out now. So that water is coming through here. Always wear gloves when you're working with a client. And what happens is the waste tube is here at the back. So this one here, that is where the waste goes to. So it's very important to keep that nice and clean and maintain hygiene in between clients, and using a bottle brush will help keep that bottle clean. So that's the dermabrasion. Once you are working on the client, you can adjust the minimum and the maximum amount of air. So that's the suction. So when we're talking about air, that's how highly it's going to be sucking the dead skins from the client's skin, and the water is quite simply how much water is emitted from the machine. Okay, so as soon as you finish this part of part of the treatment, always remove this, and that way you know that you've cleaned it. We've got the timer on, so you've got an idea of how much time you've spent on the abrasion. The abrasion is the most important and effective part of the treatment because this is the part that's going to get rid of all of the dead skin cells. And I spend, depending on the client, between 6 and 8 minutes on this section. So that's really good. And if you watch, the timer stops. So when we turn the machine off, the timer stops. So you've got different ways. As long as the machine is switched on and none of these are switched on, you can either get the machine, the abrasion section going from there or there. Just the same thing. So that's the first part. So the next step is the ultrasound. You may look at tutorials, you may look at practitioners online who may perform the treatments slightly different, or they might work the tools in different orders. There is a method to my madness. So I always go for the ultrasound as the second one. So this is where we control the ultrasound tool. It's very important that you do have the ultrasound gel. Now, the Anagel you can purchase from Amazon. I think it's about £7 now for 2 of these bottles. So in here is 250 grams. This will allow you to complete around 10 treatments, depending on how much ultrasound. So the ultrasound gel acts as a conductor for the treatment. What the ultrasound does is it helps to improve the circulation in the skin, and it improves, or it helps to open up the pores. So if you've got a new client who you've never worked with before, you want to start quite low. You don't want to go on to 10 straight away. So I would start off around about 5. Always ask your client if they have any metal fillings, because they may find the ultrasound treatment with this as a conductor could irritate their fillings. So always check with them first, and always make sure that they let you know if it is uncomfortable for them. So here we have the ultrasound tool. What I always do as well is, as soon as I start to use this, I put this by the client's ear, because it does make a sound, just so that the client knows that the sound that they can hear is normal and that it's not the machine malfunctioning. Some clients are too polite to tell you, so it's just nice to give them that reassurance. So again, you can control it here, or you can control it there. Now it goes up to 10. If this is a client who you've worked with beforehand and 10 has been absolutely fine on them, then yeah, go ahead and start on 10. This does warm up quite quickly as well, so let the client know that it does warm up so that it doesn't start them. Now the next step that I do is dermaplaning, and you'll be able to see that in the tutorial, and you'll see another tutorial of how to attach the blade to the scalpel. There are going to be people that don't want dermaplaning because they are concerned that either terminal or vellus hairs might grow back thicker and faster. Always respect your client if that is something that they don't want to go ahead with. So you can use the scrubber. I'm not particularly keen on the scrubber for quite a few reasons. It is quite powerful. So the scrubber would be switched on there, and you can choose the settings. So the theory behind the scrubber is that you would continue to attempt to remove any further dead skin. So this can be quite handy around the chin and around the nose, around the folds. However, this does vibrate and it is quite strong, so the current that runs through this is quite strong. And again, anybody with sensitivities, metal fillings, even piercings perhaps, the power that is behind this could act as a contraindication. So just be very, 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 very careful with this part of it. Practice on people that you know, who's going to give you good feedback, and always start off low. Okay, so I'm going to switch off there. If you see this flashing, what it means is that you need to empty the waste bottle at the back. Action is the spray, and I may refer to it as the air at some point. And what this does is it emits oxygen. So we've already got rid of the dead skin cells, we've opened up the pores, and what we're now going to do is we're going to put oxygen into the skin. Now, I don't actually have it to hand, but I will show you a different tutorial. There is another section to this. So there is an attachment that goes on there so that when you spray your client with this, small particles of water is also emitted. And this is where B comes from. So if you chose to use that, what you would then need to do is you need to turn the select, you need to turn B to select. Water from here would be emitted out of this tool. I prefer not to use the water for a few reasons. The first is the client has already experienced a good amount of hydration throughout this treatment, but also it can be quite uncomfortable for the client. The air is actually more therapeutic, they can relax more, sometimes the spray needs filling up part way through the treatment, but also the spray can sometimes go into areas that are uncomfortable, so it can spray onto the neck, it can run down the neck. So I choose just to use the oxygen because I feel that this is much more beneficial to the client. So that's the spray. I'll show you how it works. So the spray can only be switched on there. So if you look, you can see how that spray is making contact. Now it is cold, but it is a comfortable feeling for the client. So you'll see on the tutorial later how this actually works. And I would probably spend around 4 minutes on the client. But again, as discussed, you can make this treatment your own. I'll turn the spray off there. So the next is the radio frequency. There are machines that have a slightly different looking tool, which I will show you. So the radio frequency can be a very, very good tool. However, the benefits of this tool are only sort of emphasised if you spend a great deal of time working with this tool. So the settings on the radio frequency actually go all the way to 20. I have never gone above 10 because this tool does emit some power. So it's using radio frequency to reach the mass part of the skin, which is the lower layers of the skin. So how it would, as mentioned in the tutorials later, be very, very careful not to apply any oil-based products on the client's skin. If the client has got too much of a build-up of oil-based products on their skin, it will act as a conductor in the wrong way for this tool. It will be very uncomfortable for the client, but it can also cause severe damage. So be very, very careful not to apply any oil-based products on the client's skin. And how this works is you just work very slowly on the client's skin, and this tool will actually reach the muscles. So if you spend 30 minutes very, very slowly on each client's jaw, each side, they would see a significant amount of jaw tightening. However, the results would be very short term. So this can be a nice part of the treatment. It can be a nice relaxing part of the treatment, but you've got to be aware of contraindications such as using oil-based. But again, check with clients to establish if they do have any metal fillings, because there could be a contraindication or a contraction. And the final part of the tool is what we call the cold hammer. Now, the best way to remember this is it looks a little bit like a microphone, so I always remember it as the finale. I used to get confused with the ultrasound and the cold hammer. That's just the way that I remember it. So we'll switch it on. It doesn't have any settings. It's just a standard setting. And by which stage you'll have applied the serums onto the client's skin, and this is safe to use with oil-based products on the client's skin. What this does is it just cools the client's skin down from the treatments that they've received from all of the different tools, and it helps to close those pores back down. So that's the cold hammer. So at the end of that treatment, I would be removing any water left over and renewing the water for the next client, and I would be emptying the waste bottle, giving the waste bottle a clean. It looks worse than what it is. Some clients look at the waste bottle and think that's just their skin, but it's also the products as well. So if you have cleansed the client's skin beforehand, some of that cleansing lotion will be going into the waste. If we look at the side of the machine, so when you're putting it together, it does tell you which tools click into which part. Now, these leads aren't very long, and they do get tangled up very, very quickly. So it's quite important that you do maintain that part of the machine.